Welcome to K&T Adventures. I'm Tim, and in this episode we're going to do some more detailed testing on the Renogy 100-watt panel. Now, I've been scratching my head and trying to come up with a number of different tests to try to get a feel for how this panel is going to perform in the real world and how it could perform in an optimal world if you have the ability to use it as a tracker. Now, we're going to kind of keep in mind, in the back of our mind, the performance of the panels that are currently on our Winnebago View RV, two SunPower 100-watt flexible panels. So let's get started and see how these things do. Today we're going to start a little bit more detailed testing. I thought I would get a little more detailed with the 100-watt panel, since that's the panel that most people are going to have. It's manipulatable. It only weighs 16 pounds, and it's a really nice size for a lot of different applications. Again, we've got it hooked up through our suitcase controller, running down into a 12-volt deep cycle battery, running over to an inverter, running over to a 25-watt 2-amp load, basically lamp. So this is our testing rig for this panel. We didn't start till about 10 o'clock this morning, so we're not going to have a full day's worth of testing here today. We do have overcast conditions, so this is kind of a little bit of an interesting test today. See how many amp hours we will get out of overcast conditions. We're currently running at about 2.7 amps out of the unit with fairly reasonably heavy overcast. So we'll see how that progresses over the course of the day. Late afternoon now, it's about 4:30. We're full shade. Let's go take a look and see what we got for output. I don't know if you can see that, but we're at 14 amp hours for the day, 1.3 amps. So we're down to 1.3 amps of production in full shade in a, what do you call this, partly cloudy, mostly overcast, a little bit of sun, but there's no sun back here. Our mostly overcast day ended up with only 15.7 amp hours of production. Not really unusual for that kind of weather. We had a good day of testing today. It was kind of a poofy cloud day, largely clear skies, but with some nice poofy clouds. We flat panel tested. Panel was flat all day long. 100-watt panel. We're going to end up right about 29.5 amp hours for the day out of this panel. I think we peaked at just a little over 5 amps right at about solar noon. We did have some clouds go through periodically throughout the day that is going to eat into our daily production by probably a couple of different amp hours. So this is how day one ended up. We ended up just shy of 30 amp hours for the day. We had a real down blip in the middle of the afternoon as some clouds went over. But a pretty good day all in all for our first day of flat panel testing under decent skies. Yeah, just before we went to bed last night, I caught that there was a chance of showers for a couple hours last night, and so I made sure that I covered everything that was a open connection up. It's right at just before 8 o'clock. We're sitting at 0.9 amps, and we dried the panel off. Really didn't want we tried to dry the panel off. We got most of the water off. So not to impact the production here today during our testing. We got some mild clouds, but straight up it's pretty blue, so we'll have to see how this all comes out today. Should get a good test in, and we'll report back later. So day two ended with a slightly higher overall production. We didn't quite hit as high a peak as we did the day before, but because we didn't have that hour of cloud cover, didn't lose that hour of production, we ended up the day slightly higher. The one thing I will point out that I thought was very interesting is we ended up with high overcast in the late afternoon hours and actually overproduced or produced more on day one in those shaded hours than in day two. It's just the brighter open sky that you have with cloud cover than blue skies that actually got us quite a bit more production in the shaded hours. Good morning. Today's our second day of angled bench testing. Now, I just wanted to get a reference as to what the difference is between just flat panel, which is how it'll be on the RV, and if you were to be able to utilize some sort of tracking, at least rudimentary tracking over the course of the day. What's the difference in amp hours of production? So today's the second day. Yesterday we set this up and I came out here every hour, sometimes every half hour, and moved the panel to try to get the most amp hours out of it that were possible based on the sun available. Of course, we still have our shading in the afternoon, and that's a problem, but we wanted to see the impact of that as well. And quite honestly, the results aren't surprising, but man, there's a big difference between flat panel and being able to track. And we'll go through all that. I've got all the numbers. I've got a spreadsheet built. Today is going to be a little bit different than yesterday in that I started out with a morning angle, but I'm not adjusting it every hour or half hour. We're just going to adjust every 3 hours or so, just to kind of keep it relatively tracked, like you probably would if you had a suitcase unit out at your campsite. So this is going to be the lazy tracking day, and we'll see how much of a difference between yesterday and today, diligent tracking versus lazy day tracking. We've got a little more high clouds today, so I expect that that's going to impact our production a little bit, but we'll see how this works. Take care. Well, it's just after 5 o'clock, and we've got pretty moderate overcast. We're down to just generating 1 amp hour on this panel. And one thing that we found with the tilting is once the unit becomes shaded, it's actually better to face it towards just the most open sky, and you'll get the highest power production just out of open sky versus being pointed at a building or a tree or something like that. So I've got this set up for tomorrow morning. We are at just over 34 amp hours produced today. We were just under 40 amp hours yesterday, but we had much sunnier conditions yesterday than we've had today, and we didn't tend to this thing anywhere near as much as we did yesterday. We stopped by the RV this afternoon to do a couple little things, and I had not hit the battery disconnect when we left it the last time, 3 days ago. And so, if you don't hit the battery disconnect, there are things in the RV like the propane sensor, etc., that continually run. Well, that's got two 100 watt sun power flexible units on top. This is what Winnebago did in 2019 up through 2019, and so 200 watts on top, and looked like we were going to probably end up at about 34 amp hours for the day. We're at 34 amp hours with this unit tilted periodically through the day on a 100 watt panel versus two 100 watt panels up there. So that's interesting. I think we're going to be pleasantly surprised, even though these are going to be mounted flat, that we'll get a lot more production out of the rigid panel than we've gotten out of the Winnebago factory sun powers that are on the unit. So I'm going to have to think about what we're going to test next, but we'll talk to you later. Have a great night. Oh, and one last thing. I like my kludgy setup. This is one heck of a sophisticated tilt operation. Have a good one. It's a bright and shiny new day. So what's next for this test? Well, I pondered on it overnight, and I want to test the difference between a 100-watt Renogy panel and a 100-watt Renogy panel with diode bypassing, which is supposed to improve significantly the performance in the shade. So that's going to wrap this up. Hopefully, I've got to take off to go to Phoenix for a couple days next week. Hopefully by the time I get back, my Renogy panel will be here, and next weekend we can start testing a panel with bypass diodes versus the cheapest model in the Renogy line. Look forward to all your comments. Give it a thumbs up if you like the video, subscribe, keep in touch. Have a great week.